All right, so let's take a look at Tencent's Q3 earnings for 2024. We've got quite a bit of material to go through here. Looks like we've got the earnings call transcript and some slides from their presentation and a press release. So that should give us a pretty good look at how they're doing, where this company's excelling, where they're struggling, and what their plan is going forward.
Yeah, and I think it's particularly interesting to look at Tencent's performance this quarter, given the economic situation in China. They recorded 8% revenue growth year on year and a pretty impressive 19% jump in operating profit.
Yeah, that's pretty good, especially considering the context. So where's that growth coming from?
Well, their gaming sector is still a real powerhouse, both domestically and internationally.
Okay, so let's break down those gaming wins. What's happening in their home market?
So domestically, their evergreen titles like, Honor of Kings and Peacekeeper Elite are still performing really well. But I think the real standout story here is the huge success of VALORANT in China.
Yeah, I can see why. I
Uh,
mean, having a Chinese team win the global championship,
Yeah.
like that is a huge deal, not just for national pride, but for the game's popularity. Did that translate into actual, dollars and cents for Tencent?
Oh, absolutely. That victory really boosted enthusiasm for the game, which led to more players, more engagement, and ultimately more sales of in-game items. On top of that, they've had some new releases like DnF Mobile, which is already a top performer. And then you've got Delta Force, which is interesting because they're trying something new by releasing it simultaneously on mobile and PC, both in China and globally.
Oh, wow. Simultaneous release on multiple platforms. That's a pretty bold move. It sounds like they're trying to really capture a wider audience.
Exactly. And while it's still early days, the initial signs are looking pretty good.
So gaming is clearly a major strength for Tencent, but they've got a lot more going on, especially with their Weixin ecosystem. So what's the latest with their e-commerce strategy? Here, they're shaking things up a bit.
Yeah, so instead of jumping on the live streaming e-commerce bandwagon, like a lot of other companies are doing, they're building something that could potentially be much bigger and more integrated with their mini shops. So basically, you can shop for anything you need right within Weixin. No need to switch between apps.
So it's like this unified kind of built-in shopping experience right there in the app you're already using for messaging content payments.
Exactly. And they're really focusing on providing a trusted and seamless shopping experience that's just woven right into the fabric of Weixin. And, this kind of strategy has worked for them before. I mean, look at video accounts. They standardized short-form video within Weixin and saw massive growth. So now they're hoping to do the same thing in the e-commerce world.
So does that mean that Weixin could actually become like the dominant e-commerce platform in China, like even surpassing giants like Alibaba?
Well, it's certainly within the realm of possibility, right? They have this massive user base, a tightly integrated platform, and they've definitely got a track record of innovating. But, we can't forget about the fierce competition in the Chinese e-commerce landscape. Consumer behavior is constantly evolving, so it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out.
Yeah, that's for sure. Speaking of evolving, we've got to talk about AI. It feels like Tencent is making some pretty big bets in that area.
They are, and they're already seeing some returns on those investments. For example, AI-powered systems are enhancing their ad targeting and content recommendations. And, that translates directly into higher revenue.
So it's not just this theoretical investment in the future, right? It's already having a concrete impact on their bottom line.
Absolutely. They've even launched their newest foundation model, Tencent Holdings Turbo, and it's twice as efficient as the previous version, which means they can basically do more with less computing power.
Hold on now. For those of us who aren't, AI experts, can you break down what a foundation model is and why that efficiency matters so much?
Sure, so think of a foundation model as like the brain behind a lot of AI applications. It's trained on massive amounts of data to perform a whole range of tasks. And the more efficient the model, the faster and cheaper it is to run, which is super important for a company like Tencent with its huge user base and all of its different products.
Makes sense. So they're not just kind of dabbling in AI, they're building these sophisticated tools and putting them to work across their products. And that's not just in gaming and e-commerce, right?
Right, we're seeing AI integration in everything from their cloud services to their social media platforms. It's still early days, but the potential for AI to really transform Tencent's business is huge.
So we've got this high-level view now. Strong overall performance driven by gaming, some really exciting developments in e-commerce, and this clear commitment to AI. But let's zoom in a little bit. How are they navigating the current economic and political landscape in China?
Well, that's where things get really insightful. For example, how is Tencent's strategy being influenced by the recent shift in government policy towards pro-growth? They're already seeing some positive signs, but the bigger question is how are they positioning themselves for the long term? Well, one thing they've been emphasizing is their focus on doing, the right things. And for them, that means complying with regulations and really putting user value first. And they believe that this approach is going to set them up for success no matter what happens with the economy in the short term.
Okay, so it sounds like they're trying to build a really solid foundation, to weather any storm. Are there any specific examples of how this philosophy is playing out?
Yeah, absolutely. Take their payment trends, for instance. Their average order value, the amount spent per transaction has actually dipped a little bit. But that's partly because they've been actively eliminating some lower quality transactions. But here's the key takeaway. The number of transactions is still growing at a healthy 10% year on year.
So it seems like they're not just chasing bigger numbers, right? It's more about focusing on sustainable, high quality growth. It's about building trust and making sure that payment ecosystem is healthy for the long haul.
Exactly. And this commitment to quality extends to their recent move to collaborate with other platforms like Taobao. So now users can use Weixin Pay within the Taobao app.
Really? Isn't that a little bit counterintuitive? Helping out a competitor in a way? What's the thinking behind that?
Well, that's where things get interesting. Tencent sees this as a win-win situation. For users, it creates a smoother, more convenient experience. For Weixin Pay, it expands their reach and accessibility. And for Taobao, it gives them access to new customers who prefer using Weixin Pay.
So by focusing on user experience and making payments easier, they're actually growing the whole pie, even if it means working with companies that you might consider rivals in some areas.
Exactly. It shows a shift towards a more cooperative mindset, I think. Competition is always going to be a factor in the tech world. But there's a growing recognition that collaboration can be good for everyone involved, especially for the end users.
Yeah, it suggests a certain level of maturity in the Chinese tech landscape, kind of moving away from that winner-take-all mentality to a more collaborative approach. But even with this openness to collaborating, has Tencent said anything about maintaining their own standards and security?
Oh yeah, they've been very clear that user safety and compliance are still top priorities.
Hmm.
So any collaborations they do will have to meet those standards.
Yeah.
And I think this really offers a glimpse into how Tencent is balancing openness with their commitment to responsible practices.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Strong performance driven by gaming, a revamped e-commerce strategy centered around Wexin, a clear focus on AI, and this nuanced approach to navigating the economic and regulatory landscape in China. What's the big takeaway from all of this?
Well, I think Tencent is really strategically positioning itself not just to react to changes in technology in the Chinese economy, but to proactively shape the future.
So they're not just along for the ride, they're taking the wheel and charting their own course. What should we be paying attention to in the coming quarters? What kind of hints or clues can we get from the information we have?
Well, one thing that stood out to me is that they haven't disclosed their share buyback plans for 2025 yet. But they did say they'll announce them at the year end. They've already spent over 90 billion RMB on buybacks this year, exceeding their target of 100 billion.
Wow, it sounds like they're serious about returning value to shareholders. But they're also investing heavily in areas like AI. How are they balancing those two priorities?
Well, they highlighted their strong free cash flow, which suggests that both dividends and buybacks are probably on the table for next year. They're also strategically divesting from their investment portfolio, which is freeing up even more capital.
It seems like they're being very deliberate and thoughtful about how they allocate their resources. They're not just hoarding cash, they're actively managing their assets to maximize flexibility and fuel future growth.
Right, it's a balancing act.
Yeah.
Rewarding shareholders while also investing in strategic areas like AI and their Weixin ecosystem. It really shows their long-term vision and their commitment to sustainable growth.
So to sum up, Tencent is doing really well with gaming. They're making big moves in e-commerce. With those mini shops, they're all in on AI. And they're expertly navigating that complex landscape in China. It's a company in motion, constantly innovating and evolving. But are they missing anything? Could there be some hidden weakness that we haven't uncovered yet? Is there anything in this material that hints at potential vulnerabilities or challenges?
It's a really good question. And it's an important one. I mean, while Tencent seems to be in a pretty strong position overall, there are always potential vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
One thing that kind of jumps out from the earnings call is that lag in revenue growth for their international games compared to the growth in gross receipts.
Yeah, I remember that. But they spun that as a positive thing, right? Something about player retention.
Exactly. Yeah, they were saying that players in those international markets are sticking around longer, which is great, right? I mean, that's fantastic for long-term engagement. But it also means that it takes longer for that engagement to actually turn into, recognized revenue. It's a bit of a balancing act.
So strong player retention is a good problem to have ultimately. But it does create this like short-term discrepancy between engagement and the money coming in. So what does that mean for investors?
Well, I think it means that investors need to be patient and they need to really focus on the big picture. The long-term health of that international games segment looks really promising, but it might take a while for those numbers to catch up.
So Tencent is doing really well, but they're not immune to the challenges of operating in a global market like this. Is there anything else in these materials that hints at any other obstacles or areas where they might stumble?
Hmm. They didn't really specifically address any major weaknesses, but they did talk a lot about the importance of staying agile and adaptable. They know that the tech landscape is constantly changing, and they need to be ready to evolve with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. No company can just rest on its laurels, right? They've
Uh-huh.
got to be constantly learning, experimenting, adjusting their strategies to stay ahead.
Exactly. And I think, that this deep dive has given you a really valuable framework for understanding where Tencent stands today and how they're approaching the future. But we've only just scratched the surface here. There's always more to learn and explore.
Absolutely. This has been a fascinating look at Tencent's latest earnings, and it's definitely given us a lot to think about. We've seen their successes in gaming, their ambitious moves in e-commerce, their embrace of AI, and their really smart approach to navigating all the complexities of the Chinese market.
Yeah, and I think one of the most important takeaways is that even a company as huge and successful as Tencent is not standing still. They are actively shaping their own future, embracing collaboration and constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the world of technology.
So keep an eye on Tencent. The story's far from over. Who knows? Maybe we'll revisit this again down the road and see how things have unfolded. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.